They praised her voice. They worshipped her beauty. They used her image to sell records and fill theaters, yet behind the curtain, they treated her like she was invisible. Lena Horne, one of the most dazzling performers of her era, was supposed to be a household name on par with Judy Garland or Marilyn Monroe. Instead, she became a brutal example of how racism in Hollywood didn't just discriminate, it destroyed careers, silenced voices, and robbed generations of icons the legacy they deserved. This isn't a soft story about old Hollywood's mistakes. This is about systemic cruelty. In the 1940 and 1950, when Lena Horne was breaking barriers as a glamorous African-American star, Hollywood didn't just put her in a box, it built a cage around her. Executives praised her talent in public, then cut her scenes from films when they played in Southern theaters, terrified that white audiences might walk out simply because a black woman appeared on screen. Imagine that. Entire performances erased, not because of quality, not because of audience demand, but because of raw, unapologetic racism. And this wasn't just about film. Hotels in Las Vegas refused to let her stay in the very resorts where she was the headline act. Clubs wanted her voice but not her presence. She could sing on stage, but she was forced to enter through the back door. Lena herself would later confess that the humiliation was endless, that no matter how perfectly she sang, no matter how dazzling she looked, she was constantly reminded, "You are black, you do not belong." The cruelty didn't stop at discrimination. Hollywood dangled opportunity like bait. They told her she was the next big thing, then slammed the door shut. They gave her roles that were essentially ornamental, never the complex, leading parts her white contemporaries received. She was too light-skinned for some roles, too black for others. Hollywood weaponized her very identity against her. This story is not just about Lena Horne's rise and fall. It is a story about an industry that used racism as a weapon of control, punishing any performer who dared to be talented, beautiful, and black at the same time. Lena fought back. She refused to play the stereotypical maid roles that Hollywood shoved onto every other black actress. But in refusing to bow down, she was punished even more severely. Tonight, we unravel the tragedy of Lena Horne, not as a footnote in Hollywood history, but as a glaring indictment of a system built on exploitation and prejudice. This is not just Lena's story. This is the story of how racism in Hollywood tried to silence her forever. Before the cruelty of Hollywood carved scars into her life, Lena Horne's story began in Brooklyn, New York, in 1917. She was born into a middle-class African-American family, a rarity at the time, but one that did not shield her from the bitter bite of racism. Her parents separated when she was young, leaving Lena in the care of relatives. From the very start, life demanded she fight harder than others just to stand in the same place. But even as a child, Lena had something that no prejudice could deny presence. She was striking, elegant, and carried herself with a confidence that belied her age. By the time she was 16, she joined the Cotton Club chorus line in Harlem. This was no ordinary job. The Cotton Club was one of the most famous nightclubs in America, where Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway played to crowds of wealthy white patrons. But here's the contradiction. While the music was black, while the dancing was black, while the soul was black, the audience was not. The club's performers couldn't even mingle with the crowd. It was the perfect snapshot of America's hypocrisy. Black artistry celebrated on stage, black humanity erased off stage. Lena's beauty made her stand out immediately. Hollywood scouts began to notice her, and by the early 1940s, she had signed a contract with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM, the biggest studio in the world. To the outside world, it looked like the dream was coming true. Here was a young African-American woman poised to break barriers, to finally stand alongside the glamorous leading ladies of the Golden Age. But inside the system, the walls of racism were already closing in. MGM saw Lena as both an asset and a liability. They loved her looks and her poise, so much so that they pushed her as exotic, someone who could appeal to audiences without explicitly being too black. Hollywood executives literally debated what shade of skin was acceptable for her roles. She was labeled marketable only if she was ambiguous enough to not offend white audiences. Her roles reflected this cruelty. In films like Cabin in the Sky and Stormy Weather, She sang beautifully, commanding the screen. But notice the pattern. Her scenes were often filmed in a way that could be easily cut out when the movie was shipped to Southern theaters. That was the reality of her so-called stardom. Hollywood valued her voice but erased her existence whenever racism demanded it. Yet Lena refused to play the game entirely. She rejected the demeaning roles of maids and black caricatures that other African American actresses were forced to accept. This was both her pride and her curse. By standing her ground, she made herself a target. MGM never gave her the big, transformative role that could have made her a superstar. Instead, they dangled her in front of audiences like a jewel they were too afraid to show in daylight. Still, in these early years, Lena Horne became a beacon. To African American audiences, she wasn't just a star, she was proof that elegance, talent, and dignity could exist in a world determined to deny them those qualities. She was a fighter, even when the battle had only just begun. By the mid-1940s, Lena Horne had the world at her feet, or so it seemed. She was signed to MGM. She was performing with some of the greatest musicians of her era, and her face appeared on posters across America. But behind the glamour, Hollywood was suffocating her with racism so blatant, so deliberate, that it bordered on psychological warfare. The ugliest tactic? Censorship by erasure. Hollywood executives knew that Southern theaters would never show a black woman in a position of glamour, power, or desire. So they gave Lena roles that were carefully crafted to be disposable. She would appear in musical numbers singing beautifully, looking radiant, and then those very scenes could be cut with scissors when the reels reached the South. That was the arrangement. Talent that could be deleted at will. Lena's brilliance was treated like a removable ornament, not the beating heart of a film. This wasn't paranoia, it was policy. In film after film, her appearances were isolated from the main storyline, so that segregationist audiences wouldn't have to endure the sight of a black woman sharing the same narrative space as white actors. Lena later recalled the humiliation. I was there, but I wasn't there. I was visible, but invisible. And when roles weren't erased, they were poisoned. Hollywood typecast black women into maids, mammies, and comic reliefs. Lena refused those roles. She said no when MGM tried to push her into playing yet another servant. That defiance cost her dearly. While her white peers were being offered dramatic leads and love stories, Lena was being punished for daring to demand dignity. The cruelty extended beyond the screen. In Los Angeles, Lena was a star. In the South, she was a threat. Hotels that booked her as a headliner would then force her to stay in segregated, colored-only accommodations. At casinos, she could sing on stage but wasn't allowed to walk through the front door. Audiences paid to see her, but society demanded she remain invisible outside the spotlight. It was a constant contradiction, worshipped as an entertainer, degraded as a human being, and Hollywood executives thrived on this hypocrisy. They used Lena as a symbol of progress, pointing to her as proof that they were integrating black talent into the mainstream. But in reality, they were silencing her, stifling her, ensuring she would never rise to the level of Bette Davis or Katharine Hepburn. Lena was there to be shown off, but never celebrated. The effect was devastating. Imagine being told, over and over, that your very existence was a problem, that you were too beautiful, too talented, too intelligent to be ignored, yet too black to be fully embraced. Hollywood didn't just discriminate against Lena Horne, it weaponized racism to keep her in a box, reminding her daily that she would never be allowed to shatter the barriers she was born to break. This was not just prejudice. This was systematic sabotage. If Lena Horne's career was a battlefield, then humiliation was the weapon Hollywood used to keep her in line. At every stage, the industry and the society that consumed it reminded her that she could sing for them, entertain them, even inspire them, but she would never be their equal. The hypocrisy was relentless. In Las Vegas, Lena was a headliner. Her name lit up marquees on the Strip, and crowds poured in to hear her voice. Yet when the curtain fell, she was treated like an intruder. The hotels that booked her refused to let her stay in their luxury suites. She was forced to sleep in colored boarding houses, while the white stars, far less talented, lounged in penthouses. It was the grotesque contradiction of America's so-called glamour capital. Black excellence on stage, black exclusion off it. It went further. In many clubs, Lena wasn't even allowed to walk through the front door. She had to slip in through service entrances, the same ones used to carry trash out of the building. Imagine it. A woman hailed as one of the most beautiful entertainers in America, dressed in diamonds and gowns, sneaking in through a back alley like a criminal. Audiences would rise to their feet when she sang, but the moment the music stopped, racism dragged her back down, and the double standards inside Hollywood were no different. MGM paraded her as a symbol of progress. "Look," they said, "we have Lena Horne, proof we embrace diversity." But those same executives refused to cast her in any role that would put her on equal footing with white actresses. Love stories? Off limits. Serious drama? Out of reach. They gave her glossy musical cameos, then congratulated themselves for their inclusion. It was a sham, a PR trick. Meanwhile, Lena's white contemporaries were granted freedom. Stars like Judy Garland and Katharine Hepburn were allowed to be complex, flawed, human. Lena, however, was trapped in a racial straitjacket. She had to be flawless, perfect diction, perfect poise, perfect performance, because any slip would be used as proof that she didn't belong. Yet no matter how perfect she was always deemed less. And when Lena spoke up, the punishment was swift. She called out segregation in hotels, she criticized Hollywood's treatment of black actors, and suddenly the offers dried up. She was branded difficult, a label that white actresses wore as a badge of artistic integrity, but that black actresses wore as a death sentence for their careers. This was the double standard that defined Lena Horne's life. She was good enough to sing for white audiences, but not good enough to sit beside them. She was glamorous enough to sell tickets, but not respectable enough to deserve equal roles. Hollywood applauded her talent in public, then humiliated her in private. It wasn't just discrimination. It was systematic degradation, a calculated effort to remind Lena and everyone watching that no matter how high she soared, society would always find a way to drag her back down. For years, Hollywood tried to silence Lena Horne, erase her roles, humiliate her in public, and remind her of the invisible boundaries she was never meant to cross. But Lena was not built to be silent. If Hollywood thought she would simply smile through the pain, they were wrong. She turned her humiliation into fury, and her fury into action. By the late 1942, Lena began to use her voice not only to sing, but to fight back against the system. When hotels in Las Vegas forced her to stay in segregated boarding houses, she confronted management directly. She demanded equal treatment, and in some cases, she got it. She was one of the first performers to challenge the Strip's racist policies, opening doors, however, reluctantly for other black entertainers who came after her. Lena also refused to accept Hollywood's maid roles, even though it meant fewer opportunities. She would not degrade herself for the comfort of white audiences. This decision cost her dearly, but it also made her a symbol of resistance. Other black actors looked to her as someone willing to say no, someone who refused to trade dignity for screen time. Her activism didn't stop there. Lena threw herself into the civil rights movement years before it became mainstream. She worked with the NAACP, marched alongside activists, and used her celebrity to shine a spotlight on injustice. She became friends with Paul Robeson, another star whose career had been destroyed by racism and political persecution. When Robeson was blacklisted, Lena spoke out in his defense, knowing full well that it could put her career in jeopardy. And it did. Her boldness came at a price. Hollywood labeled her dangerous, uncooperative, and political. Studios began to back away. Television networks hesitated to book her. In a society where white stars could express eccentricities and still thrive, Lena's defiance was treated as a threat. She was punished for refusing to stay silent, but Lena never bowed. In the 1962nd, as the civil rights movement grew louder, she stood on the front lines. She marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She sang at rallies. She lent her fame to a cause that mattered more to her than any Hollywood contract. "My identity is very clear to me now," she once said. "I am a black woman in a white world. My job is to survive and to not be crushed." This was the heart of Lena Horne's resistance. She knew Hollywood would never give her the role she deserved. She knew racism would always try to clip her wings. But instead of breaking, she used her platform to expose the hypocrisy of the very system that tried to silence her. For Lena, survival was not just personal, it was political. Every song she sang, every stage she walked onto, became an act of defiance against a society that wanted her erased. By the time the 1972nd arrived, Lena Horne was no longer just a singer or actress, she was a symbol. She had become a living reminder of the cruelty of racism in Hollywood, but also a beacon of dignity and survival. Younger generations of black performers looked to her and saw proof that you could fight back, that you didn't have to bend to the stereotypes or play the roles meant to humiliate you. In that sense, Lena's legacy was powerful, but behind the symbol, behind the poise and glamour, there was pain that never went away. Hollywood had robbed her of the career she deserved. While her white contemporaries grew into legendary icons with dozens of starring roles, Lena was left with scraps. Yes, she had hits. Yes, she had albums and sold-out concerts. But she never had the platform Hollywood should have given her. That absence haunted her. She spoke openly about her anger. Lena admitted that much of her life had been defined by rage. Rage at the injustice. Rage at the humiliation. Rage at knowing she was just as talented, if not more, than the women who had been handed the world. "I was always angry," she once confessed. "I wanted desperately to be accepted, but it never came. Not from the industry, not from the world I worked in." And that anger carried consequences. Her personal life was scarred by failed marriages, strained relationships, and battles with depression. The burden of constantly fighting racism left her exhausted. The world saw the glamorous gowns, the flawless performances, the radiant smile, but behind the mask, Lena carried a deep sorrow that fame could never heal. Still, she refused to disappear. In the 1982nd, she staged a triumphant comeback with her Broadway show, Lena Horne, The Lady and Her Music. It was her declaration to the world. She had survived. The show ran for more than a year and earned her a Tony Award. It was a victory, yes, but it was also bittersweet. Lena knew that this recognition had come decades too late. It was a prize given to a survivor, not the career-defining opportunity she should have had in her youth. Her legacy was also marked by contradiction. On one hand, she became a trailblazer, the woman who proved that black performers could be glamorous, sophisticated, and commanding. On the other hand, her life was a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when racism dictates who is allowed to succeed and who is forced into the shadows. Lena Horne's name will forever be remembered, but not just for her voice or her beauty. She is remembered because her story exposes the hypocrisy of an industry that celebrated her in public while destroying her in private. That is her pain, and that is her legacy. Lena Horne's story is not simply a tale of glamour, music, and Hollywood lights. It is a warning, a reminder that even the brightest star can be dimmed by the cruelty of racism. She had everything: beauty, talent, intelligence, and a voice that could silence a room. Yet Hollywood treated her like an inconvenience, a problem to be hidden, a talent to be trimmed down and erased whenever it threatened white comfort. This is the tragedy. Lena Horne could have been one of the greatest film legends of the 20th century, a name spoken alongside Garland, Hepburn, and Monroe. Instead, she became a victim of a system that caged her brilliance. And for what? For the color of her skin. For the arrogance of an industry that believed white audiences weren't ready to see a black woman as glamorous, desirable, and powerful. But here is where Lena triumphed. She never gave them her silence. She refused the roles meant to humiliate her. She spoke up when it could have destroyed her career. She marched when it could have cost her freedom. She fought when others begged her to accept her place. She never accepted less. And that defiance is her true legacy. Every black actress who came after Lena Horne, Cicely Tyson, Diana Ross, Halle Berry, Viola Davis stands on the ground she fought to clear. Every time a woman of color wins an Oscar, sings on the world stage, or headlines a film, Lena's shadow is there. The pain she endured was not for nothing. It became a weapon, a message to future generations. You can be more than the world allows you to be. Still, We cannot romanticize the suffering. Lena Horne's anger, her bitterness, her sorrow, they were real, and they were justified. Hollywood stole from her. America stole from her. The applause she earned will never erase the humiliation she endured. And that truth must be spoken, loudly, angrily, without apology. Because if we tell Lena's story as just another triumph over adversity, we sanitize the crime. The real story is this: Hollywood destroyed her dreams because of racism. That destruction cannot be undone, only remember. Lena Horne's voice may have been silenced too often in her lifetime, but it will not be silenced in history. She stood tall, she fought back, and she forced the world to see her whether it wanted to or not. And now, long after Hollywood tried to erase her, we speak her name with the dignity and fury she always deserved. Lena Horne was not just a star, she was a survivor. And her tragedy will forever indict the world that tried to silence her.